Okay, slowly but surely we're getting there. To bring you up to speed, let me just say this. I looked at this dictionary over the many years. I tried to find what I thought might be the most significant word in the English language, maybe even the oldest word, and I found the word that. All right, I found the word that, and presently in modern times it has 5 grammatical functions. I talked about that. Okay, so now I'm keeping the grammatical functions. You can't change that, but you can change the terms and you can change the way you look at it. Okay, so I came up with some new terms. I refer to that as a definite article, a pro-form adverb, or you could say pro-adverb, same thing, a demonstrative pronoun, and then for the 4th function that we talked about, I looked at 3 different levels and I found 3 different terms. I found abstract proform, associator, and distinction indicator. I talked about that in my last video. So now we're at the 5th grammatical function of that, and in contemporary traditional terms, you would see subordinating conjunction, or you would see complementizer. Well, I don't care for those terms, so I refer to that in its 5th function, or one of the 5 functions, as a noun-clause indicator. This is very, very simple. It won't take me long. I refer to it as a noun-clause indicator. Okay? Now, I don't like, in this grammatical function, I don't like referring to it as a subordinating conjunction, okay? Because the definition of subordinating conjunction is roughly, it introduces a subordinate clause and links it to the main clause, okay? That's what a subordinating conjunction normally does. Well, in the case of our noun clause, all right, using the word that as the noun clause indicator, the clause would be subordinate only because the word that sits at the head, at the front of it. That's the only reason it's subordinate. Now, granted, it can't stand alone, all right, which I would call a synthetic clause. But the point is, the content, the value of the clause, the noun clause that we're talking about, the value, the content, the data that we get inside that clause is it's much too profound, and it's much too important to consider the clause entirely subordinate. Okay, that's hard to say, but because of the content of the clause, it's subordinate only in the fact that it has the word that in front of it, and it can't stand alone, which I would call synthetic, a synthetic clause. Okay, now the other term, all right, that they use is complementizer. All right, that's the term that you see in grammar books now, or you go on the internet and you'll see it. Now, a complementizer, roughly speaking, is a word that can be used to turn a clause into the subject or object of a sentence. Okay? So that's good. It's a decent description, except for the complementizer, all right, works to turn a clause into a subject or an object. Okay? Now, just give me a minute. I'm going to explain this with the paper. It's easier with the paper. But as far as the word complementizer, and the word complement is in the title, okay? You have 6 things that the noun clause can act as. There's 6 sentence functions that the noun clause can represent, all right? And only 3 of those are complements. That would be your subject complement, adjective complement, and your noun complement. So of the 6 things that the noun clause can do, all right, only 3 are actually complements, or only 3 are referred to as complements. Now that sounds really weird, but let's actually look at it mapped out. Okay, we're going to map it out. So we have the word that. We're making that noun clauses, right? There are other relative pronouns. We're not talking about other ones like who, whom, which, what, that, whoever, and all the rest of them. We're not doing that. This is a study of the word that, which I think is the most significant word that I could find in that dictionary of 160,000 entries. Now, the noun clause. The noun clause can act as a subject, okay? That he lives to serve is honorable. In other words, he lives to serve humans. He lives to serve mankind, or nowadays they say humankind, okay? So that's what we mean. That he lives to serve, okay, lives to serve others, is honorable. Now, this noun clause, that he lives to serve, is the subject of this sentence. That's pretty clear, all right? Now, the noun clause, the same one, can be used as a direct object. I heard that he lives to serve, or I heard that he lives to serve humankind. In other words, serve people. So that's a direct object. That's pretty clear. Same clause, same exact words. And then also, that noun clause can be used as an appositive. An appositive is something that sort of renames the subject, okay? Kind of tells you about the subject in slightly different words, okay? So the noun clause, the same one, very same one, can be used as an appositive. The concept, comma, okay, that he lives to serve is embraced by Christians, generally speaking, okay? This isn't philosophy today. So the concept, then you see the comma, right? And then you see the comma over here. Now that tells you, it's an indicator, it's a clue that that's an appositive, and it's also a clue that it's a non-restrictive clause. It's not really necessary, not critical, but it's there. So you see a little hint, the concept, comma, that he lives to serve, so that would be used as an appositive. So here you have three situations where the noun clause functions as three different sentence functions, okay? It's three different parts of a sentence. All right, that's pretty clear. Now then you have the complements. Subject complement, you might have heard about that. The point is that he lives to serve. The point is the subject complement in the old days might have been called a predicate adjective. It's an adjective that's in the predicate. In other words, the predicate part of the sentence, okay? And you have your adjective complement. I am delighted that he lives to serve. Now, the noun clause is modifying the word delighted. But you see the clause itself, even though they say, oh yeah, I know that, that's an adjective complement. But the clause itself is adverbial. It's adverbial in nature. We'll talk about that later. But the point is, you see here another instance of that same noun clause functioning as a different part of the sentence. Then you have noun complement, which is also controversial. Some people don't even believe in them. Some people say, oh, you know what? The noun complement, they say, oh, the noun complement and the appositive are basically the same thing. And that hinges on the comma, whether or not it's restrictive or non-restrictive. So people get confused. This is a big area of confusion, but I can clear up a lot of that confusion at some point in these videos. So here you have now a noun complement, all right? The notion that he lives to serve is ridiculous. Some people would say, you can't live like that. You can't help people and take care of people all the time and not think of yourself. That's terrible. Who would live like that? Well, some people do. So you have a noun complement, and here's your noun, notion, and there's your clause, all right? Complementing or completing the thought, notion. Okay? Now, that is the fifth or one of the 5 grammatical functions of the word that. We covered them all. And remember, when I looked in here, I looked in this dictionary, and I even had 3 of these. And I have other dictionaries too. Okay, I couldn't find a word that had more grammatical functions than the word that. And I couldn't find a word that was more interesting than that. Okay, so what we have then is, if we change the order, that I showed you in my videos, you'll end up with this. You'll end up with that, the word that, and it has a base form. It's just used regular. It comes before the other word. It comes before the other significant word in the relationship. That book, all right, definite article. Okay, some people would call this a demonstrative adjective. They would call it something else, but I don't. We'll talk about that later in my summary. Right? Then you have that difficult. You say, is it really that difficult? Okay, that's your pro form adverb. And here you have that functioning as a demonstrative pronoun. That is my book. Hope I'm reading correctly. All right. Then you have in base form, you have that he lives to serve is honorable, and that's the noun-clause indicator. The word that in that function indicates that you have a noun clause coming up. In other words, you better get ready. You got a noun clause coming. Now, the only other form of that would be the meta form, right? That is performing a meta function. It goes beyond. It's a little different, a little weird. And that you'll find after the other significant word or words in the association, okay? And an example would be, the plant that died was a rose. You see, that comes after plant, all right? Plant that died, and we talked about this. We talked about what used to be called a relative clause, and I call them either distinction phrases or distinction clauses, because the clause itself, whether you call it relative, adjective, defining, whatever, it makes a distinction. It clearly and absolutely makes a distinction. So why not call it distinction phrase or clause? You see, this that died, the plant that died, you can't be more distinct. There might be 10 plants and one died. You say, well, that's it, that's the one. Okay? So that's what I ended up with. 4 uses of the word that in its base form for 4 different functions, and the word that in its meta form. All right, and I talked about that. You can review the other videos. It's a beautiful thing. That as a so-called relative pronoun, I don't call it that. I call it an associator or a distinction indicator. But the point is, that's it for the main theme that I wanted to impart. Now I'll go back and do a couple summaries and reviews and hope to make it perfectly clear, because maybe someday somebody might say, you know what, these are good ideas. I'd like to use them. I'd like to keep them. We'll find out. Time will tell. So thanks for being patient, and goodbye.